Hello there, my name is Kuma, and today we are taking a close look at Aroma.
汚れ除去の効率完璧。ちょっとやそっとつついたくらいじゃこの泡は消えないよ。洗浄剤レシピの調整 OK。
Aroma is a blast caster, the third member in the class, together with Ifrit and Serum. This caster class is an AoE class with a special range unique to it. They can hit all enemies inside their range, a straight line going 5 tiles forward. But they also have quite a long attack interval, 2.9 seconds. On top of the basic characteristics of her class, Aroma is capable of levitating enemies with her talent. In case you don't remember, Levitate is a debuff in Arknights that disables enemies' actions, like stun or frighten, but it also turns them airborne for the duration of the levitating effect. That means these enemies will take extra damage from Cutter's skill 2 for example, or the Module X from Marksman Snipers. Of course, it doesn't work on enemies who are already flying. The levitate duration varies depending on the source, but one thing that does not change is that the enemies with weight equal or higher than 4 will only be levitated for half the intended duration. Aroma levitates enemies for 2.5 seconds on the first hit against each of them. That means she only levitates each enemy a single time. She also has 25% extra attack against each enemy in this first hit, considering her module and potentials. This talent doesn't really have a lot when it comes to utility. Levitate is a nice status effect, but since Aroma can't repeatedly apply it, it would be very awkward to try and set up your squad against the first hit Aroma does on each enemy. It's not a very inviting payoff, but this talent does help Aroma deal with threats by herself in many situations. If you're still deploying your squad and you didn't have time to deploy a defender or someone else to help Aroma, she might be able to buy herself enough time to kill some small enemies that enter her range because of her talent. Since the levitate lasts for 2.5 seconds, she almost gets an entire extra hit for free that she's able to deal. Because her attack interval is 2.9 seconds, the enemies will only walk for 0.4 seconds between her first 2 hits. This can be especially useful if you're using a single tile for Aroma. Having this one extra hit is a massive difference when she would only be able to hit enemies once otherwise, it's literally double. Of course, Blastcaster is not a class that can dish out massive DPS, as we'll see better later, so you shouldn't plan on leaving Aroma by herself for too long. Even if you find ideal lanes to make full use of her range, sometimes enemies will simply walk too fast for Aroma to be able to deal with them. So it is very important to give proper support to Aroma. Some examples of these would be AoE slow like Earth Spirit S2 or Suzurane S3, the module on ambushers reducing the movement speed of enemies inside their range, as well as the binds from Ethan and the movement speed debuff from Manticore's S1. Or, of course, something as simple as blocking the enemies so they don't exit Aroma's range too early. I'll talk a bit more about offensive supports later as well. For now, let's have a look at Aroma's skills. And I want to explain both of them first before I talk about their usage and performance, for reasons I will soon explain as well. Aroma's S1 is an auto recovery power strike, just like Hohaya's S1 or Conviction's S1. This skill deals 210% of her attack as arts damage, 10% more than a Power Strike Alpha. As you know, I am a big fan of Power Strikes. They scale well in integrated strategies because they have a damage modifier that multiplies all the attack increases you can get. And that's why Spinach and Choco Pasta feel so good. Aroma's S1 also has an added 90% damage bonus when she hits aerial enemies. This makes full use of her talent, since as we all know, status effects always apply before the damage, except in very specific occasions that were made different on purpose. But this is not one of those exceptions. Aroma will levitate enemies before the damage applies, and this 90% bonus will go through. This will also deal more damage to enemies who are already flying, like your everyday drone. But it is important to keep in mind that this extra 90% damage does not appear on the red numbers Aroma produces. Since her skill counts this 90% as an extra hit of damage, it does not meet the 150% threshold that red numbers have. It is a bit more complicated than that, but the important part is you will never see this 90% unless you do some shenanigans. So don't be weirded out if the numbers you see only map out to the initial 210%. Also, this skill has a SP cost of 8 and can hold 2 charges. Now for her skill 2. Aroma increases her attack by 100%, and she gains an effect similar to the Ancient Fresco relic from IS4, dealing 110% of her attack as arts damage to enemies when they fall back to the ground after being levitated inside her range. This side effect procs of course from her talent, but it can proc from other sources of levitate as well. The operators currently available who can levitate and potentially make use of this effect on Aroma's skills are Chonyue, Kanipalat, and Oda on their 2, and Hohaya and Irene on all their 3 skills. The SP cycle on this skill is 2342, which is a really bad skill cycle, only 35% uptime, but that is normal for the class. Corosiron has a 2540, and even Ifrit has a 2040, although she has it on her S1, which nobody normal plays with, and Ifrit also has a SP talent. But at that point, that's just your usual 6-star privilege, nothing new to see here. But I want to draw a comparison between Aroma and Corosiron, because if you look at their numbers, you will see how close they are to each other. Although, I'll show you that after we take a look at the mystery enemy. The mystery enemy from last video was the Raging Die Beast, the elite version of the dogs from the Chonyue event. These puppers are the top when it comes to trash mobs. They decided to trade all their defensive points for max HP, becoming a true menace ready to leak on low level vanguards. Not an enemy to be taken lightly. The mystery enemy for this video will be this one. Take your guesses in the comments. This one will be tricky, but I believe in you. Now, as I was saying, Corosiron and Aroma have very close damage numbers. The DPS I'm showing on screen for both of their skills consider a single target, no defenses, and a full skill cycle, meaning the attacks they hit while the skill are up, and the attacks they hit while in cooldown as well. Both of them are so close, it's even scary. Just in case you are curious, let me show the total skill 2 damage for them as well. Both have about 14,000 skill damage, it's almost the same as well. The difference is just them making up for the difference in skill cycles that they have. These numbers, they are low, that is true, but that's also by design. Classes focused on AoE, on average, have lower damage potential than normal, especially if you are not a 6-star, and they are supposed to make up for it by hitting a lot of enemies all at once. If you can't find these situations, or even if you want to do so or not, that's up to you. I didn't make the rules, and I didn't make your fun as well. But I wanted to explain both Aroma skills first, because as you saw in the numbers, the damage output is almost the same between them. The difference from each other comes down to a basic conundrum. Do you want constant damage all the time? Or do you want a little bit of a higher damage output sometimes, with a lower damage output during the cooldown? Of course, there are some quirks to keep in mind as well, and this is also where you can bring Corosiron into the discussion if you want. Will you be hitting a lot of flying enemies? Aroma S1 is better at that. Do you like playing with other sources of levitate? Aroma S2 will do more damage. Do you plan on exploding a lot of slugs and you would like to stop that if possible? Play with Corosiron as S2, he can silence. No, you just want a better cycle, but you don't want to use a power strike. Coruscant's S1 is great, it has a 50% uptime. And with that said, we can now look at Aroma without worrying about her skills, because that choice really just comes down to preference and setup. As you might have guessed from what we've seen so far, Aroma really likes fighting massive waves of trash mobs. That's the specialty of blast casters, and they are better at this than any other class, mostly because of the massive reach they have. You can literally kill 5 lanes of enemies with a single blast caster. Well, if you can find a map with 5 parallel lanes, that is. Raids in Reclamation Algorithm are amazing if you wanted to see them go ham. They will win alone in a basic setup. You can even let the base core tank while they slowly kill all the enemies. But you have to understand that Aroma is not great at killing elites or bosses. It just comes down to how slow the damage comes out against a single target. If you're just blocking a lane, or giving some good slow support to her, she will be able to clear out some elites here and there. And of course she can kill bosses if you hold them in place for long enough. But it's just not practical to have Aroma trying to clear enemies with a lot of HP. That's why I like to look at damage potentials and DPS. It's not the best idea to have an operator with a 14,000 damage skill trying to kill a 40,000 HP enemy. It's gonna take a long time. Even more if you try to face her against some of those enemies with a lot of res, who will cut down her damage output in half. But that's fine. That's why you have single target operators with higher damage. Let someone else deal with the big HP enemies, while Aroma sweeps the trash on the floor. Now let's talk about some offensive support, I promised that earlier. Giving Aroma an attack buff can be a bit awkward, so I don't really recommend it. She attacks very slowly, so she won't make good use of such buffs. Unless of course you're playing with a very high duration attack buff skill, like Skadi Alters S2, in which case of course it's worth it. Any operator would be happy to have the Skadi Alter skill 2 buff. The figure can be a bit different if you're talking about IS. After all, you can get a lot of relics that simply give attack buffs to your operators. And as I said before, Aroma's S1 is a power strike. It will take full advantage of Spinach. She is not an operator for all situations, but she is someone you can play around with, depending on the run you're having. Just don't expect her to kill the yellow boss on ending 4 while it has 100 res. That's not a good idea. Outside IS, you could use Sora to squeeze some extra damage out of Aroma's S2, but it really won't make that big of a difference. Instead, you can get a lot more mileage from giving Aroma a SPD and SP buffs. If you decide to go through the hassle of setting Aroma up for an Ike buff, you can more than double her damage output on her skill 2. And the skill cycle almost lines up between the two of them as well. Something interesting to keep in mind is in her talent. Remember that she can levitate enemies for 2.5 seconds, right? If you give her some ASPD, theoretically 16 ASPD, she is able to use both charges of her S1 on the same enemy. And that means she will proc the 90% extra hit twice on the same enemy, something she can't usually do. It's not a big payoff, but it's certainly a bonus just from giving Aroma some ASPD. And it's not like it's a buff you wouldn't want on her anyways. Lowering that massive attack interval will feel great. So simply playing with Angelina or Scarp or any other SPD aura in the squad is already a nice support for Aroma. And of course, we have the SP buffs. Aroma will enjoy very much having some extra SP and activating her skills more often. Her skill 1 has a normal SP cost of 8, but no harm in lowering it, right? While her skill 2 does have a massive downtime, and you will feel the damage difference over time if you lower it and you can activate that skill 2 more often. So bring your Warfarin or your Liscarm, they are sure to help. They will give a lot of SP from all those enemies Aroma is killing, or the ones trying to exit her range at least Karm can block. And you can even use Ptilopsis if you want a more passive approach, it works as well. Of course, this also means Aroma will be happy to have some of the buffs you can find in Triple S. After all, you can mix and match SP recovery, ASPD, and attack, all to your liking. Create the Aroma of your dreams. But that's what I have to say about Aroma. A beautiful girl in this beautiful class that are Blast Casters. Now tell me what you think about Aroma. Are you excited about her? Or are the damage potentials below 100,000 just not enough for you? I'd love to know. Don't forget to like the video, and I hope everyone has a very nice day. Peace out!